Hello and welcome to DE's live lesson for Science Week. I'm Matt Wilshire and I'm going to be guiding you through this live lesson. The theme for Science Week this year is Change and Adapt. We're going to be learning all about amazing adaptations, which is why we've called this live lesson Reptiles Uncovered, Adaptations, Habitats and Survival. Now, I'm joined today by the very lovely Mike Linley, who is our expert zoologist, and he has got some amazing reptiles to show us. Now, thankfully, these creatures are protected and they're looked after by Mike in special conditions here in Norfolk. We're going to be meeting them very, very soon. But before that, a massive thank you to all the schools who are joining us from across the country. Hello especially to Beach Street Community Primary who are joining us today. There'll be some different activities for you to complete throughout this lesson. You can fill these in on the handout provided to you by your teacher. Now, whilst we get all of our reptiles ready, have a quick discussion with your class. How long have reptiles been roaming the earth? Can you make a guess and put your responses in the chat? There should be a timeline appearing on the screen to help you with your discussions. So take a moment to do that now.
Closely related are reptiles to the dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs are reptiles, and they are related to our modern day reptiles, but they're a separate group. So you've got crocodiles, turtles, tortoises, lizards, snakes, tuatara. Right. You also have dinosaurs, which came about and then are now extinct. They actually evolved themselves into birds. Modern day birds have got more in common with dinosaurs than the modern day reptiles have with dinosaurs. Well, the first reptiles appeared 320 or 300 million years ago. So they've been around a long time. And it's because of their ability to adapt and change that they've conquered virtually every habitat on Earth, apart from mountaintops, the deep ocean, and the polar regions. Some are quite small. It's quite surprising. You think of early reptiles as being massive, like dinosaurs and things. Well, some of the early reptiles were actually tiny lizard-like animals. This is Kaituosaurus, which the fossil was found in China. But this is a fully grown lizard, about 15 centimeters long. It lived on the edges of the sea, and it went through the seaweed that was floating on the side, and it was feeding on small fish. And we know it was feeding on small fish because its teeth are all curved backwards. Because when you're trying to catch a slippery fish, you've got to really hold on to them tightly.
Yeah, of course.
We also know that all reptiles lay eggs in some form, and we've found a few of these fossils with two babies inside them to show that the eggs were kept inside the body until they were ready to be laid when they hatched and then swam away, tiny versions of the adult. We've also got here a fossil of an early dinosaur. Now the dinosaurs sometimes were huge. This one is called Spinosaurus, and it grew to about 15 or 20 meters long. And it was like a massive crocodile-like animal, but with flippers. Mm-hmm. So it was like a cross between a sort of dolphin and a crocodile, but it was a reptile, and it lived in the oceans, never came out of the water, and it fed on other reptiles and fish.
And so what came first, the dinosaurs or the reptiles?
Well, they all had a common answer, they all evolved from fish in some way or another. Right. But there were reptiles around before the dinosaurs. And then the dinosaurs really conquered the earth until a massive meteorite came and 60 million years ago wiped out many of the huge reptiles, many of the huge dinosaurs out. But many of the smaller reptiles survived because they could burrow in the soil, hide in the water, and not you become extinct because of that incredible change to the planet.
Amazing. And you've got another type of fossil there as well?
Crocodiles, the crocodiles that we have today, are very similar to the crocodiles that evolved nearly 200 million years ago. They've changed very little. And that is a sort of tribute to the success of the crocodile design because it lasts so well. Why fix it? Why try and change it if it works well? So the crocodiles today, like fossil crocodiles, every big scale on the back has a bone in it, and that's for added protection. So if they were attacked by anything, it's not just the scales that protect them, there are bones inside their skin that give them that little bit extra armour.
A little bit like a suit of armour for a crocodile.
It is like chainmail, that sort of thing. It's flexible, you know, all the scales can move, but every one has got this solid bone inside it.
Right, let's take a closer look at some of the amazing features of the reptiles that we see today. Which reptile are we going to have a look at first?
Well, this is a leopard gecko. It might be familiar to most of you out there because this is commonly kept as a pet in this country. They breed very well, they live a long time, 20, 30 years, and so they do very well in captivity. Now you notice I'm not gripping him, I'm just allowing him to actually sit on my hand. My hand's quite warm. Reptiles are cold-blooded. They do need to be warm for their body to function properly, but they get that heat usually from the sun, which is why you find more reptiles in warm tropical countries than you do in, say, Britain. He comes from the deserts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it often lives under stones during the day. It's a gecko, it's nocturnal. The first thing about you notice are its eyes here, and then just behind the eyes are the ears or the openings, and you'll see its throat pulsing, and that's because it's got lungs and it's breathing air. It has a backbone or vertebra down here, therefore it's a vertebrate. Just like us and birds and frogs and other vertebrates, it has a backbone that goes all the way down from its head, all the way down into its tail. It's covered in scales, which allows it to live in dry places so it doesn't dry out. It also has a large fat tail.
I can see, yeah.
Now this species, because it lives in a desert, eats when it can, and when it can't, it just lives off its fat supply, which is in its tail.
So it's all stored inside the tail?
A big fat tail. This one lays eggs. Nearly all reptiles lay eggs. One or two do keep the eggs in the body and have live babies, but they all develop from eggs, which are inside the body as it's growing. Some are hard and some are soft. You can see here, if I put my finger here, this little tongue comes out and it's tasting my finger. Its main sense is a sense of taste. When you see a snake, it flicks its tongue in and out all the time. With a gecko, it likes to put its tongue on something to taste it. It's got relatively short legs, usually 4 of them, but there are some reptiles with just 2 legs, and there are some reptiles, obviously like snakes, with no legs whatsoever. Also, you can see it breathing. These have lungs, so they breathe air. They've got claws for climbing, and usually a long tail. In some species, the tail can be many times the length of the actual body of the animal. However, snakes, it's the opposite. People think a snake is all tail, but it's not. It's all body with a short tail at the end.
Now, let's put some of our knowledge into practice. It's time for the very first activity. On your handout, we want you to write all the reptiles you know, and take a think about answering this. What is a reptile? Have a think about all the information that we provided and record some examples. Best of luck. See you in a moment. How did you get on? Here are the answers on the screen. I wonder how the pupils at Churchill Primary School have been getting on. Let's move on to reptile habitats now. Mike, what do all of these reptiles have in common?
Well, they're all geckos, just like the leopard gecko, but they all come from different habitats. The leopard gecko, if you remember, lives in the deserts of Afghanistan and Pakistan.
And he had a very fat tail, didn't he?
For storing food when food is hard to find. This one on the left here, my left, is a crested gecko from the island of New Caledonia, and it lives in the tropical rainforests there. It spends virtually all of its time on the trees, which is why it's brown and really well camouflaged for life on the bark. And the crest are all these little sort of fringes around its eyes and head, which help to break up its outline, so it doesn't look, when it's pressed against the bark of a tree, it doesn't look like a lizard. It just looks like part of the bark.
Looks like he has some amazing eyelashes there, doesn't it?
Yeah, right over each eye. Big eyes again. It can't blink. All geckos are usually nocturnal. Some aren't, but most of them are. And they have this sort of contact lens over each eye, like snakes do, which doesn't allow them to blink, but does give them protection. And they've got great big eyes for seeing at night. But they keep them clean by licking them. Their tongue can come out and they can lick, which a snake can't do. It can lick each eye to clean it, so it can see very well at night time. So this is the crested gecko. Now here we have a gecko from the dry forest, the tropical forest of Madagascar. It's a big gecko, it lives during the day, and its name is the Madagascan giant green day gecko. That describes it in its name. It's actually during the day, it sits out in the sun, but it does spend nearly all day on the leaves of the tree, which is why it's green, where it's pretty well camouflaged. Now, if I just rotate this slightly, if I can, you'll see its feet allow it to cling to the glass. Now, this is brand new glass, it's very smooth, and yet those feet, the pads on its toes, allow it to cling and even climb up the glass. And this is one of the features of most geckos, their ability to climb. And if I were to continue and turn it right upside down, it can actually hold on without falling off, because you often find them on undersides of leaves as well. So there it is, able to cling. Those toes are very, very well adapted for climbing. And here we have some species from a gecko from New Zealand. New Zealand's climate is very similar to ours. Now, most geckos are found in hot countries. New Zealand is lovely in parts, but in some places it's cold. These geckos, they're very dark, they absorb the heat of the sun because they do sit and bask during the day as well as coming out at night. But the special feature about these geckos, which these don't have, these geckos lay eggs. It's quite cold in New Zealand, so these geckos keep the eggs inside the body and give birth just to 2 fully formed babies where the eggs hatch once they're born. And the New Zealand geckos are pretty unique for having that feature. Now, when we talk about the ability of reptiles to adapt and change, we talk about it happening over millions of years, but it's happening all the time now, because if you go somewhere warm like the south of France on holiday, or if you go even to Asia or Singapore, places like that, you might stay in a hotel and at night you might find geckos on the walls and ceiling of your room because they're attracted to the light, which attracts moths and flies and other insects and mosquitoes. So people don't mind them in their homes because they're doing them a favor by eating these pests. And these geckos are now called house geckos because they're virtually impossible to find in the wild. You only ever find them in houses and hotel rooms, and they even lay their eggs stuck to the back of photos and paintings on the walls of the room.
Wow, reptiles are really scaling new heights when it comes to adapting. But it's now time to move on to our next activity. Where do these reptiles live? On the screen, you're going to see different images of reptiles. It's up to you to add their habitats. Use your handout here to guide you through answering this challenge. Have a go with that now. welcome back. I wonder how pupils at New Scotland Hill have been getting on. Take a little look at the answers on the screen. You can see them now. We're going to have a little look at an amazing reptile that has done some amazing adapting. Is that right?
Here's a chameleon, right? As well as some adaptations and changes in its body, its eyes, its feet, everything else, it's got this amazing prehensile tail, which you can see is wrapped around the branch.
Is that a little bit like a monkey's?
Just like some monkeys use, and it acts like a fifth limb. So it can actually hang from the branch just by its tail. So it gives it much more versatility when it's in the trees and it's hunting insect prey. Now, the colour change it does is very rapid. It can go from brown to green, even nearly black. If it sees another male or a female nearby, it can change colour really, really quickly. During the day, if it's in the leaves in the trees, it's green. If it's on the trunks of the tree, it's brown. I always go hunting for chameleons at night, because at night they go white. And if you walk around the trees with a torch, you can see them sitting in the trees, and they've got no idea that they need to be a different colour because they're fast asleep. But it's one of the most amazing creatures. There's so many adaptations and changes that this animal has, all in one particular species.
Well, I think it's a perfect time to play our chameleon spotting game. I wonder if you can remember any of the chameleon facts that Mike has just told us. Put on some keen searching eyes and discuss here. How do you think the chameleon has changed to fit in with its surroundings? Have fun and search for the chameleon. How did you get on? Were you able to spot the chameleon? Now, Mike, chameleons are masters at adapting to their environments rather quickly, but you've got some different reptiles here who have adapted, and they're very noisy, aren't they?
Yeah, you know they're here.
And they've adapted over a very long period of time, haven't they?
They have indeed. We're talking about the tortoises, turtles and terrapins. Turtles evolved in the sea. They were the first ones to evolve, and very quickly they led to the tortoises, which came onto land. So let's have a look at the tortoise. This is a typical tortoise. This one's called a horsefield tortoise, and it's really from Russia and a little bit further west. So it's a European type tortoise. It's not a tropical one. So the first thing you notice is its shell. Mm-hmm. All three, tortoise, turtle and terrapins, have a hard shell. And in the case of a tortoise, it's quite domed. It's quite high. If you look at a turtle, it's quite flat. These are quite high. There's the head, got 4 legs, very powerful diggers, very strong claws. These things can burrow down into the hardest earth possible. And their shell is more or less round, and that's important because when they dig a burrow, it means they can turn around at the bottom of the burrow and come back out, rather than have to back out. All burrowing tortoises are usually round. The elongated tortoises can't do that because they're the wrong shape. So the legs at the back, the females, this is a male, it's got a big tail. Males have big tails, females have a short tail. And the female that uses these 2 hind legs for digging the hole in which she will lay her eggs. Now, interestingly, the lungs of a tortoise are at the top, which is quite handy if you happen to fall into water, because it means that you can float like this, and your head is near enough to the top of your shell to be able to breathe, and you don't drown. They lay eggs, and even though there's not much distance between these 2 parts of the shell, they lay hard-shelled eggs like that.
Right.
And they're like a bird's egg. They're hard and calcium. So they lay these in a hole in the ground, 4, 6, maybe 8 in the case of a small tortoise like this, and they cover them over, then forget about them. They leave them in the sun, and 3 months later, a little tiny baby tortoise will hatch, and it's called, any ideas?
A creature hatching out?
Yeah.
It's not going to be something like Bob.
No, or Fred. It's
Right.
called a hatchling.
Right.
And we have a 1-year-old tortoise here. So it's taken a year to get that size. And if you look carefully at the scales, the shell scales, you'll see it's like the rings of a tree. There are little circles where it's grown around the edges all sides.
Yes.
So all the little parts of the shell grow equally. You can't age it by the number of rings.
Right.
This is 1 year old, and there's about 6 rings around each shell, each scale. But that's a good indication that it's a healthy tortoise because there's plenty of growth rings on it.
Okay.
Then after 2.5 years, they'll reach this size. Then after about 8 or 9 years, they'll reach this size. And this tortoise is probably about 25 now. It'll live for another 25 years at least.
Oh, so that they can live for about 50 years?
50 years, even longer. People have recorded 80 years.
Wow.
The longest living vertebrate is a giant tortoise from Aldabra that we know is at least 240 years old.
Wow.
And it's still alive now. So
Fascinating.
yeah. So they're the tortoises.
So what are the main differences between a tortoise like this and a turtle?
Turtle shells, as you can see, they're not very domed, they're flat for swimming, and they don't have claws and legs, they have flippers, front and back. So they would come ashore every 1 or 2 years to a sandy beach to lay their eggs. And because they do this, and they're such a big animal, they can lay up to 90 or even 100 eggs at a time.
Wow.
They often don't do it every year, maybe every other year, but they return to the same beach where they hatched on maybe 60 years earlier.
So a turtle's habitat is more to do with being able to swim.
Yes.
And a tortoise is not?
Exactly. They can't swim, they can float.
Wow.
So they can float very well. Tortoises are vegetarian mainly. Turtles eat mainly seaweed, aquatic algae, and occasionally things like jellyfish, and the odd fish, but fish are usually too quick. So if a fish is dead or has been caught in a net and is thrown over the side, a turtle might come and eat that because it's easy prey. But they can't hunt very well.
And the creature you got here, the very noisy creature, trying to climb up the side there. This isn't a turtle or a tortoise, no?
No, it's halfway between the two. This is called a terrapin. So terrapins probably evolved from tortoises. So turtles lived in the sea, evolved into tortoises that came onto the land, and some of those that were on the land decided to go into fresh water, and they evolved into terrapins. So like a turtle, they've got not so much of a dome shell, it's quite flat because it helps them to swim. They've got claws rather than flippers, because although they do spend a lot of time in the water, they do need to climb out of the water and onto the land, and they actually probably sunbathe around a lake or a river when it's nice and sunny, then plop into the water to escape any danger. And like all the others, they lay hard-shelled eggs, usually in a riverbank in a nice sandy, open, sunny, exposed place where those eggs will incubate and hatch about 3 months later. So just to summarise, turtles evolved and they live in the sea, and they come ashore to lay their eggs on sandy beaches maybe once a year. Tortoises evolved from turtles and live on land and are almost entirely land dwellers. And the terrapin lives halfway between the two. So it spends 50% of its time in fresh water and 50% of its time on land. So turtle, terrapin, tortoise. And here's a little baby terrapin to give you an idea what they look like when they hatch from the, that's 2 weeks old.
And a very long little tail.
Long tail at the moment, that will reduce in comparative size as it grows.
And it will grow from this sort of size to the size you got.
This one here, that was about 3 years old, so it takes about 3 years.
Wow. It's turtly awesome. Sorry. I wonder if we can celebrate our new turtle knowledge with our next activity. Are you not enjoying these jokes? Sorry.
Sorry.
You need to compare between a turtle and a tortoise. How have they been adapted to live on land or water? You're going to need to either label the tortoise here or use some of the images that we provided to help you discuss some similarities and differences. Welcome back, everyone. I hope all at Khalsa Primary School are doing well with their discussions. Take a little look at some of the answers on the screen now. The key word here is evolve. The common ancestor is the turtle, who are only reptiles that live at sea. So thinking about evolution then, Mike, are there any other reptiles that have evolved over a long period of time? I presume we're not just talking about growing wings or an extra set of legs.
Yes, I mean, the snakes are a good example of long-term evolution. They've been around quite a long time. And if we look at them, you'll see that there really is just a head, a body and a tail. The thing they're lacking are the legs. But they evolved, they changed from lizards that chose a burrowing existence. And if you live in a burrow, legs can often get in the way. So their legs got shorter and shorter. And we have many burrowing lizards now which are legless. We've got a couple which just have a pair of back legs of species, and we've got a couple which just have a pair of front legs. And the snakes are evolved from those that lost all the legs. This is quite a sort of what I would call a basic snake. This is a garter snake from North America. Now, snakes can kill or overpower their prey in various ways. The garter snake is semi-aquatic. You find it near lakes, rivers, streams, because it feeds mainly on fish, frogs, newts, and other aquatic animals like that. It can detect them with its tongue, and it just pounces and swallows. And it usually simply swallows them alive. That's the easiest thing to do. A fish isn't going to struggle very much. You can overpower a frog, they just swallow them alive. So that's the garter snake. They come in a whole variety of colours. This is nearly black, this particular type. Some have got stripes, some have got blue stripes, some have got red stripes, but this is quite an unusual one.
So it's quite shiny, isn't it?
Very smooth. Yeah, they're not slimy. People think snakes are slimy, but they're simply really smooth. You can just glide through my hands like this. Don't be fooled by its body. Don't think it's all tail. The head is there, very small. The tail actually starts there.
Right.
So it is nearly all body with just a short tail at the end. Right, so here's a king snake. This is another North American species, mainly terrestrial. You find it living under logs and out in the desert sometimes. This one, as you can see, is very brightly coloured. But this snake detects its prey with its tongue like any other snake, but it kills by constriction. Now, a lot of people think that constriction means it crushes its prey to death, but it doesn't do that. It's much more subtle than that. When it seizes a lizard or a small mouse or even another snake, it wraps its body around it, and then when its prey breathes out, it tightens its grip, which doesn't allow the prey to breathe in again, and the next time it struggles, it squashes it a little bit more, squeezes a little bit more, and it simply suffocates its prey. It doesn't break any bones, doesn't crush its lungs, it simply prevents the animal from breathing. And once it succumbs to that, it can then turn around and swallow its prey, usually head first, because things are more streamlined when they swallow them head first. So this is what would call a constrictor, and that's how it kills its prey. Yeah, so this one hunts things like lizards, small mammals, mice, kangaroo rats, that sort of thing, and even other snakes. It can actually feed on venomous species like the rattlesnake.
So I noticed its colouring makes it seem like it's poisonous?
Yeah, it's a warning colour, but it's actually mimicking another species of snake that lives in the same habitat.
So it's time for activity 4. Discuss the garter snake and the king snake. Remember, the garter snake likes to live near water, while the king snake lives in the forests and deserts, but both live in North America. Use your handout to see if you can stretch yourself to consider if the snake is venomous or a constrictor. And so you've brought in here a boa constrictor.
It's a boa constrictor, Matt, yes. It's a very large snake. It's not quite fully grown yet. It's got a little bit more growing to do. This one's probably nearly 2 meters, maybe just under 2 meters. And it's an arboreal species. It spends a lot of time in the tree as well as on the ground. And it is a constrictor, hence the name boa constrictor, because it kills its prey, again, not by crushing, even though it's very, very powerful. It kills its prey by suffocation, by tightening its grip. You can see the muscles in its body.
Yeah.
They can wrap around the prey, and every time that prey breathes out,
It just
tightens the grip, can't breathe in.
I can see it's flicking out its tongue a lot as well. Is that doing a similar thing of...
It's sensing its environment. It's thinking, oh, I've not tasted a table before like this, and is there anything in the air that's worth eating? I must say it's pretty well fed, so the chances of him being hungry are pretty remote. And also the table's absorbing some heat here as well, so he's getting more and more active. And he loves being in my arms, literally, because I'm warm.
So where would you usually find these kind of snakes?
Boa constrictors are from Central and South America. They range all the way from sort of Mexico all the way down into Argentina. And they're all very similar, but some are got slightly different coloration and patterning. Some have got more reds on them. This is quite a normal coloured boa constrictor for the species. They feed on a whole variety of things from mammals. This could probably take a mammal about the size of certainly rats, small rabbits, that sort of thing, little monkeys. iguanas in the trees, lizards.
And would they need to eat something like that every day? Or?
No, once they've had a meal like that, they'll sit and digest it over several days, and they probably don't have to feed for another week or so at least.
And is the tail very similar to the other snakes that we've seen?
Yeah, tail's quite short. The tail starts here in this species, so maybe 20 centimetres long. And the thing about it is that we know that snakes evolved from lizards, and we can tell that in the boa constrictor, because if we look at the base of the tail, where the tail meets the body, there are still the remnants of a little claw either side.
So this snake isn't venomous, no?
No, it's not venomous. I wouldn't be allowed to do this if he was venomous. I wouldn't be allowed to keep him without a special license, which you need for dangerous wild animals.
And what kind of venomous snake could you talk about?
I'll put this one away, and then we'll come and discuss the rattlesnake.
Okay. Okay, so the boa constrictor aside, you said that there are some snakes that are a lot more venomous.
They are venomous. They are completely venomous, and some very venomous. And that's why there isn't one in front of me now. But we do have the tooth of one in front of me now. Yeah. This is the venom fang from a rattlesnake. Rattlesnake, they're North American. There are lots of different species. Some are very small, less than 1/2 metre. Some are very big, well over 2.5 metres in length. They're some of the biggest venomous snakes there are. They feed on a variety of prey, such as warm-blooded animals like small rabbits, rats, even the odd lizard, that sort of thing. And they overcome their prey with venom. They will strike, and the head will go backwards, and the two fangs will go forward like that and inject the venom, and then they will retreat and protect those fangs. And then they'll sit and wait for a few minutes. The venom acts very quickly because it's now going to wait for that animal to succumb. And it would probably take it several days to digest a rabbit, and then it'd be ready to hunt again probably a week later. We have developed antiserums for most species. So if you were bitten by a rattlesnake in Texas, say, most hospitals would have the antiserum and get it into you very quickly. You've got a good chance of survival. And
do all snakes, do they have the ability to shed their skin? I know you've got some examples here as well.
The smaller the snake, the more often they shed the skin as they're growing. The bigger the snake, the less often.
And does that help them to grow as well?
They need this to grow. It's like wearing a suit of armour. You can't stay in the same suit of armour as you get older. You've got to get rid of that one and get another one. And if you look along the pieces, you'll find the head piece. There's the head of the snake. You can see the two eye coverings, which are transparent, like
small little holes,
contact lenses, yeah. And that skin, that is shed as well. And the way the shed works is that it peels off from above the mouth and below the mouth at the same time, and then the snake finds something rough, like a rock or a branch, and rubs against it, and then slithers out, leaving its old skin behind it.
Wow.
Now, rattlesnakes are special because they're called a rattlesnake because on the tip of their tail they have a rattle. And those rattles have developed from the shed skin. If you look at the very tip of a shed skin here, there is a scale at the very end of it. In the rattlesnake, that's the one bit of skin that isn't shed. It's left on. So every time it sheds its skin, a little bit more, then a little bit more, a little bit more, and they're all loosely attached. And they can get to 10 centimetres long, the rattle of a snake. And because it's old, dry skin, it's very dry, and if it shakes its tail, it rattles. Like this. And this is how it's evolved. And that's a warning device, because they've got many predators, but they're in danger of being trodden on by big animals like buffalo or something that could really squash it. But the rattlesnake's rattle is developed from old shed skin.
Wow. Well, I've certainly learned a lot more about snakes from this. Thank you. It's been wonderful learning about the history of snakes and how they've adapted. Well, I wonder what your favourite snake fact is as well.
Excellent. It's time to finish activity 4 for the boa constrictor and the rattlesnake. Remember, the boa constrictor lives in the tropical rainforests of South America, while the rattlesnake lives in the forests and deserts of North and South America.
Hello, and I wonder how many facts Nutton St Mary's Primary School have found today. And Mike, we're about to wrap up the session, aren't we? But you've got one last reptile here for us to look at.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce a frill lizard. This is a baby. They get to nearly a metre long, and they come from northern Australia and New Guinea. And the thing about this creature, hence its name, is a frill around its neck, which they can expand into a great big hood.
Wow.
To make their heads look really big and to frighten off any would-be predators. Yeah, and looking at reptiles, I'm thinking one of the reasons maybe why reptiles have done so well, oh thank you, boring is it, have done so well when it comes to adaptation and change, is the fact that reptiles, unlike many other vertebrates like birds and mammals, lay so many eggs. I mean, this species can lay 2 or 3 dozen eggs. A sea turtle can lay up to 100 eggs. And the more eggs you have, the more offspring you have, the more chances are that some of those offspring will hatch with a slight variation that helps their survival. And hence they become so successful at succeeding as a species.
So having more offspring is going to help their evolution, their survival.
Exactly.
Now, Mike, on behalf of DE and everybody watching, thank you so much. And thank you to all your amazing guests today as well.
Pleasure.
It's been brilliant. And we've had lots of questions sent in to us over the past few weeks, which we'll do some separate answer videos for. The most asked question, though, what's your favourite reptile and why?
Right, it's not one we've discussed today. There is a separate group of reptiles that we haven't discussed called the tuataras. And there's only 2 species in the world. They're very primitive lizard-like animal, but they're not true lizards, that they live on a tiny island between the North and the South Island of New Zealand.
Wow, incredible. Maybe that's something that people might like to research as well. Have a really wonderful science week from DE and Mike and all of your visitors. Goodbye.